In this episode of Creative Christians, filmmaker Philip Hohle joins me to discuss all things film.
Took our youth to a lock-in, I guess you could say, or a little retreat at First Emmanuel in Temple. And they had brought in some guys who did this slideshow to music and pictures of Jesus and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And that night, I was so amazed and moved spiritually that I went up to the guys and I told them, I says, I want to do what you're doing.
Oh,
okay.
cool.
So that was the moment. It was a faith moment. It was a spiritual moment that I saw this was a powerful way to change people's lives.
Oh, yeah.
And I said, I just want to do that.
That's filmmaker Philip Hohle, today on Creative Christians. My name is Tim Ristow. I'm a creative, a filmmaker and writer. I'm also a Christian. Many of my friends are also Christian creatives, writers, filmmakers, actors, musicians, photographers, and artists. Who are these people, and how does their faith infuse their creativity? These are stories of creative Christians. And welcome to another episode of Creative Christians, the podcast series that explores Christian creatives, their talents, their faith, and what they're doing at the intersection of both. I'm your host, Tim Ristow. Thank you so much for listening. If you know me at all personally, you know that I'm a filmmaker and love producing video projects. I've been doing this pretty much since college. It's what I do to make a living. I produce documentaries, short films, videos of all kinds, really, for clients. But what you may not know is how I got started in it all and the road to getting where I am today. Now, I'm not going to go into all that right now. In a future episode of the show, I may talk more about my own journey as a creative, including my passion for filmmaking. But for now, let me note just a couple of things. First, that my interest in filmmaking really began in middle school when I discovered my dad's old 8mm film camera stored away in the garage, and I started playing around with it. That piqued my interest in film and creating messages visually. Second, things really took off when I got to college. That's where I met today's guest at what was then Concordia Lutheran College, now Concordia University, Texas, here in Austin. My guest today is the talented Dr. Philip Hohle. Phil is one of my earliest mentors in video and film, and as a professor at CLC back in the day, he really helped me learn to love video production as a craft and as a wonderful creative process. He encouraged and challenged us students in learning the messaging and meaning behind the process. He taught us the process too, but he was already, even back then, shaping us to better understand the messaging and meaning behind that very process that we were learning. This interview with Phil is a two-part interview. And Phil really started as a filmmaker, which is what this first part of our interview primarily focuses on. Then the latter half of his career has been more academic and focused on his role as a film scholar. Phil has produced, directed, shot, edited, and written many, many video productions over the decades. I don't even know if he could give a number at this point of how many projects he's worked on. He's interviewed, I'm sure, well over probably 1,500 individuals on camera. As we'll talk about later, he has held many jobs and roles over the years. But he really got started with visual media at Concordia Lutheran College in the 80s, ultimately becoming a video producer for what was then called Lutheran Electronic Media, which was basically the media production department of the college at that time. That later became Concordia Media Services, which is what it was when I arrived on campus and first got to know Phil. I should probably lay a little groundwork here and provide some context for Concordia history and a few of the people whose names might pop up. to kind of help you navigate this story, especially for you listeners not familiar with Concordia. First off, I'll give you a little bit of my history as well, too, to connect into all this. I'm a graduate of Concordia Lutheran College in Austin, Texas. I got my Bachelor of Arts degree there in communications. I was later hired by Concordia as a video producer and worked there for 5 years. I loved it. Concordia has a big place in my heart and in my personal history. Okay, so when I got to Concordia to attend college in the fall of '87, they had just completed building a phenomenal video production studio on campus the year prior. Truly state-of-the-art for its time. And really, truly, it remained so for most of its life. But sadly, when Concordia relocated the campus from downtown to Northwest Austin, they made a decision not to rebuild the studio or do video production on that level anymore on the new campus. So that amazing studio was demolished around 2009 when the campus was razed, about 23 years after the studio first opened its doors. Now, Peter Willey, who was formative in Concordia's media department in the early years of its development, was there prior to Phil's arrival. He was really the first video producer hired on staff in Concordia history, even though I don't think that was his official title at the time. Peter was brought aboard fresh out of college from UT, if I remember correctly, to basically spend some money to buy equipment to get Concordia started into media production, which was still kind of in its early development at that point in time, in the late 70s or so. Then Phil was brought aboard, and he and Peter worked together developing the first media department, Lutheran Electronic Media, there on campus. And they even worked together years later in St. Louis doing video production, and they remain good friends to this day. Peter is really considered a genius with his work in media over the years. I've met him a few times, and he's a very talented individual. James Wade was a talented professional photographer who taught photography classes on campus and also became a video producer in the media department. He worked alongside Peter and later Phil in those formative years. He was still there during my time as a student, and I took photography classes with him. And he was also there when I was on staff as well, so I got to work alongside James for many years in video production and learned a lot from him. Extremely talented photographer. Mike Broyles was a former CLC student, actually went to St. John's College in Kansas, and I think that ended up closing, so he transferred into Concordia, Austin, and finished his school there, and later hired on as a staff video producer for Concordia as well. So he and Phil worked together a lot over the years, both at CLC and beyond. I know Mike well and worked with him at Concordia too. He's a great guy. Dr. John Fromm was a professor in the communications department there at Concordia at that time, and he was on the theory side of things. Incredibly intelligent individual. Got the communications department off the ground with the prompting of Dr. Milton Reamer, and also very instrumental in my education and formation in communication studies. Finally, there's Dr. David Kluth, who took over the communications department there at Concordia in 1990 after Phil left. He took it to another level with developing the distance learning program and wireless microwave transmission of classes. He spearheaded the remodeling of the studio from analog to digital technology, of which I was heavily involved with during that whole process as well. And he really was responsible for turning the video production studio into a broadcast television studio, doing a lot more live production of classes and things like that. He's also probably most remembered for heading up the campus relocation effort, which was a pretty big deal. I'm sure I've left some important people out, but that should give you enough background to understand the basic context of the timeline and some of the people involved that Phil will likely reference. My guest today is Philip Hohle, filmmaker and film scholar. Phil really cut his teeth in video at Concordia before moving on to St. Louis to work with the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod's video production arm there on a national level. Soon after, he started up his own production company called Parabolic Productions, which is actually still around today, now known as Parabolic Media, and is more of a public relations, marketing, academic support entity. Phil has written 3 books: Lenses, 10 Ways to Interpret the Movies You Love and Some You Hated, in 2018. Leading from the Bottom, When a Beloved Organization Breaks Your Heart, that same year. And also Cinema and Religion, The Filmmaker's Prayer, in 2019. He's also written a chapter in a book by Cody Benjamin, released just this year, here in 2022, called Movies from the Mountaintop, 100 plus films that express God, explore faith, and enlighten church. We'll get into each of Phil's books and film interpretation in part 2 of our interview. Phil has earned an associate's degree in liberal arts from Concordia Lutheran College, a Bachelor of Science in Radio, Television, and Film from the University of Texas, Austin, a master's in speech communication from Texas State, and a Ph.D. in communication studies from Regent University. Phil is married to Gwendolyn, his wonderful wife of 41 years. Hi, Gwen. They have 2 grown kids. Phil has also traveled extensively, having actually set foot on the ground in Austria, Canada, Czech Republic, England, Finland, Germany, Iceland, India, Israel, Italy, Mexico, the West Bank and Palestine, Russia, Slovakia, Spain, South Africa, twice, Swaziland, the Netherlands, and twice in Venezuela. He's been to 48 of the 50 states, missing only Maine and West Virginia. What can I say? I'm very excited and pleased to be able to welcome my very first video production professor from my college days at CLC, Dr. Philip Hohle, to Creative Christians. Phil, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Tim. It's nice to be here. I'll tell your viewers you got an A. You paid me to say that.
That's right.
It was seriously though, Tim, you were head above almost everybody else that came through the program. I mean, there's just a handful I could count.
Yeah.
That really got it, you know.
Oh, you're too kind. I loved it. I mean, I still remember everything about, I think it was Introduction to Media, I believe is what it was called at the time. And you helped to kind of enlighten things in me that I was interested in, but didn't know enough about at that time. You really helped to put those things in place.
Was all that in the Peters Center?
Yes.
Oh, you missed out on the lobby of the old gym. It was where our production offices were. We had a classroom in that old gym. The roof leaked.
Yes.
So when it would rain, we'd have to put a trash can in the middle of the table we were sitting around. And they had these old blaster heaters in the gym that were designed to blast hot air all the way across the gym. Well, they put one of those in the lobby. And so when the thermostat in the wintertime, because these were leaky windows and that sort of thing,
right,
when the thermostat would drop so low, it would turn on so loud and this torrent of air would come and blow everything off the table. You know, all the papers would go flying. So we always had to kind of anticipate it was going to come on. So the Peters Center was a nice upgrade.
Well, and as I recall, because I do remember seeing this, there was a giant wooden box in that old gym lined with foam that was...
Yes, my colleague Peter Willey built that. That was the sound
Peter
booth,
did.
yes.
The sound booth, yeah. So voiceover, I remember...
It was a tomb.
Yeah, well, I remember talking to a few people that had actually recorded in that, and they said it was so hot in there. Yeah. There was that, and then wasn't there before that, there was a house...
yes, Hagen House. Yeah.
Hagen House, yeah.
Which still is in existence. I don't know if you were aware of that.
No, I wasn't.
This house was moved to Walberg, Texas by Fred Blakey, Fred and Candy. They bought the house. Fred. They moved it to Walberg. They did some remodeling, but you can kind of still recognize Hagen House.
Wow.
We did a lot of production out in the garage. Well, that garage is still there, you know? And so every so often I'll visit Fred and Candy and reminisce in Hagen House.
Hagen House. And so Hagen House really was the first production facility on campus there.
Yeah, I think you could say that. We also had, there was a professor there by the name of Phil Shelp. He was a biology professor, and he had this vision for creating a multimedia, interactive kind of curriculum for biology. Yeah. And he convinced Concordia to buy video equipment. And then somebody at Concordia probably told him, well, you need to get some students in here to know how to run this stuff, you know. Right. And so they found me. Mike Linebrink was the admissions counselor. I see him oftentimes up in Wahlberg. And he visited me. I was going to high school in Taylor, and I was starting to meddle with these. The library there had an old reel-to-reel black and white video system. Recorder and everything. And so when they found out that I did that, they says, we need you in the biology lab. I'm not interested in biology. You know, I said, well, that's okay. It's still production. Oh, okay. Yeah, well, we'll go. So we did it. And at that time they had got some real, Peter Willie was another one of those guys. And I remember Kevin Greetens was a guy that had gone to school there. He was a year before me. And they were doing these Groucho Marx kind of skits that would introduce the fetal pig, you know, and how to start on this. And it was really hilarious, just very creative, very creative.
Funny. Oh my gosh.
And so that was the tradition that started right away there. It's very innovative.
Where were you born?
Taylor, Texas, and a building that was the hospital at that time on 6th Street or something like that, and it became a clinic later. Mm-hmm. And when I was growing up in Thorndale, that's where we'd go for doctor's appointment. I have to tell you a quick story about that.
Yes,
okay?
Absolutely.
Mike Broyles and I were out shooting in Venezuela. Okay, we're doing a project for Concordia Publishing House. Right. And we had been there, over a week. Way out in the outback, we saw the Orinoco flow, for example. Yeah. Yes. And beautiful country, very intense few days getting all that done. Yeah. And we got to the airport and we got on American Airlines. It was so good to get on American Airlines to head home. And in those days, they had one movie. Mm-hmm. And the movie was called When the Stars Fell on Henrietta. And Mike Broyles says, hey, I've got some relatives that are in that movie. Oh so he came to be really excited. And he says, you know, it was filmed around Central Texas. Yeah. So watching that movie, there's a scene in the hospital I was born in.
Oh, my gosh. And you didn't know that was
No. Talk about a homecoming.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Oh, that's wild.
Isn't that wild?
I'm not familiar with that film. I'll have to look that up.
Good movie.
Well, what was life like for you growing up?
Teacher's kid, you know, Lutheran school there in Thorndale. He was a teacher. Lived in the Teacherage, old house there. It's still standing there in Thorndale. We lived like 2 blocks away from the church and school. Yeah. Just kind of had the freedom of a small town. You know, if you've watched Terrence Malick's Tree of Life, I think it's filmed in Smithville.
Yes.
Okay, although it supposedly takes place in Waco, I guess. You know, the scenes of those kids and the parents and the neighbors just being out in the yard and just hanging out and doing stuff when the windows open and the breeze blowing through the windows because we didn't have air conditioning and stuff like that. Yeah. That was pretty much my childhood. It was a happy childhood. We didn't have as much money as some of the other kids, but you don't notice those things so much, you know?
Yeah, that's true.
And it's, you know, we were fed and we were clothed and, you know, we had a good church community.
You grew up Lutheran?
Yeah, Missouri Synod. I joke around with certain people that Gwen started calling me, or Gwendolyn as she's known at her job. Mm-hmm. She started calling me Holy Man. And so we've had fun with that before, but one time somebody said, are you guys part of a cult or something? Yeah, you know, that he's the holy man, and what's that like?
What's
you know?
the holy man?
Yeah, I'm the holy man.
I love it.
You know, my father's name was Holy.
I figured so, yeah. And he was a holy man.
Yes.
I'm talking with Phil Hohle. How did you first get interested in film? Were there certain movies that appealed to you then? What kind of was the impetus that started that element or interest in your life?
Well, there's two branches of that question, Tim. One is the production and one is the criticism, the interpretation of it, which really came later.
Right.
But I can go back and see, for example, when I was a kid, we went to the Howard Theater in Taylor, Texas, and I saw Bambi. And to this day, I'm really not a very good deer hunter. Okay. I mean, I think sometimes I don't want to hit the deer, and that's why I miss. Although I'm a really good shot, I don't. It's it had an influence, and so it's kind of interesting to me.
Absolutely.
And then in production, when I would do a video and write the script, get it all approved, and I show it to the board of directors, and a board of directors says, I think you've missed the point. This is exactly not what we don't want to say. And I'm going, wait a minute, the script here says this, and you're interpreting it as something else. And I said, how is that possible? That two people can see the same movie or production and have two different interpretations for it? And I was scratching my head. I said, is that just me?
Yeah.
And then I realized that that's a phenomena out there, that we have lenses and filters that we interpret things from. And then that led to the dissertation. But you want to talk about the production end, right?
Let's start with that. Yeah.
Okay. I remember going to a 8th grade retreat, a junior high school retreat. I don't know what it was, but we were members of a church in Bartlett at that time. Okay. Dad had left the teaching and we moved to Bartlett. And that was, at that time, it was American Lutheran Church. We had fellowship. We were members of that church. And they took our youth to a lock-in, I guess you could say, or a little retreat at First Emmanuel in Temple. That's that church right there downtown by the I-35, big, brick church right there.
Right.
And they had brought in some guys who did this slideshow to music and pictures of Jesus and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And that night, I was so amazed and moved spiritually that I went up to the guy and I told them, I says, I want to do what you're doing.
Oh,
okay.
Cool.
So that was the moment. It was a faith moment. It was a spiritual moment that I saw this was a powerful way to change people's lives.
Oh, yeah.
And I said, I just want to do that. And then one of my other mentors, Keith Lumens, who worked at the Texas District, he was real big on that sort of thing too, slideshows and that sort of thing. I remember listening to Jesus Christ Superstar at another youth retreat.
Yeah.
And I went, wow, you can take pop culture and make it religious? And I was curious about how that worked. And I said, well, that's very powerful. It was working on me.
Right.
And so those are the sort of things that made me want to be able to do that for other people.
And this was in the 70s, probably?
Yeah, that would be the early 70s.
Early 70s, yeah. And that was kind of more referred to what multimedia at the time was kind of the coin term or audiovisual, things of that nature.
And, Concordia really started out doing more of that sort of thing than video, but gradually that technology gave way to video. So we did plays where we had like 9 banks of projectors. Peter Willey and James Wade were they real experts on that. Yeah. But they would all be syncing up, and instead of building the set, we had a projected backdrops that could just change and do all sorts of things with those projectors.
That's so interesting because Tracy and I just went to see the musical Mean Girls here recently in Austin. And the thing that I had not seen before, I think I was aware it existed, but was these giant, LCD screens as the background and as the set pieces that could put anything they want on. Right. One of the scenes was in a school hallway. They made the lockers all, the background there, and then they could change it out immediately for the next scene, just giant screens. And then maybe move in one small stand of physical lockers, for the actors to work off of. But the whole setting and the colors and the imagery that you could just change, it kind of reminds me of that.
We were way ahead of our time. I think.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, fascinating. So you started getting involved in some of that kind of audiovisual multimedia stuff at some point.
Yeah, the next step was at a freshman in high school that they had the video equipment.
Okay.
And I was immediately drawn to that because I could see myself being this filmmaker,
Right, yeah.
And, I'd walk around framing, how you do with your hands.
Yes,
and
exactly.
So I could just see this shot. And I remember this really pretty girl at Taylor's told me, if you become a filmmaker, I'll marry you. And I did. I became a filmmaker.
Yeah, there you go.
But we did not marry. So,
well, I think you found the right girl ultimately.
Yeah.
So.
And you call it filmmaking, and a lot of people at that time, it was all video. And the snobs would say, well, you're not making film.
Right.
You're not a filmmaker.
Right.
Now it's completely the same thing. It's all digital.
Exactly.
I mean, there are still people that shoot on celluloid.
Right.
But
well, that term filmmaker has certainly broadened to encompass a lot more, and more so, I think, just being a storyteller. I mean, you got YouTubers that are, shooting on small cameras and just doing stuff in their living rooms or whatever, in their bedrooms, and they're filmmakers. And it applies. But yeah, I think there are those that still want to hang on to maybe the exclusivity of that title.
Right.
What was your first project that you ever produced? First video or film project?
I don't know if this is the first, but we also, we did some in high school, and I just don't quite remember that.
Mm-hmm.
That was a long time ago. It was over 40 years ago.
Yeah.
I remember when we got to Concordia, there was a Super 8 film camera.
Oh, yes.
And we used to go to Hamilton Pool when it was wild and free, and we'd camp down there.
Right.
And so we went down there, and some buddies, we made our own version of Last of the Mohicans.
Oh, my
which
gosh.
had nothing to do with, I forget whose story that is.
Cooper.
Cooper, yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Nathaniel Cooper.
Fenimore?
Yeah,
Cooper.
that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. But it didn't really have anything to do with it. We just kind of made up these two guys, kind of hippie looking guys at Concordia that time, long hair. I won't mention their names. Kidnap a girl, and then a cowboy kind of guy. He was a Canadian who was come down to Concordia to go to school. We made him the cowboy, and he rescues her, and he chases them. And the ending shot is them jumping off into Hamilton Pool off the cliff. It's a 75
a la Butch Cassidy and Sundance.
Exactly.
Kid.
Right. And I had to make sure that I was rolling, because they says, we ain't doing that again.
one take, and that's it. That's all you get.
That's all you get. And so we synced it up to like a soundtrack that we'd start the projector and start the tape deck playing at the same time. And we had a lot of fun with that.
Oh, that's awesome. Shot on Super 8. Huh?
Yeah, I think it was Super 8 or 8 or High 8 or what. I don't remember what it was called. They had so many little formats.
Remember the Super 8 camera that was still around at Concordia.
All right,
so
that must have been the one.
I bet it had the black handle, and it was pretty big.
I
don't know.
Yeah, and somebody gave us a 16 millimeter too, but it didn't work, I don't think.
Oh, really? Was that the 3-lens one?
Yeah,
rotating?
I think so. Yeah.
I had that for many years.
Did you use it?
No, I never did. I always wanted to. I always assumed that was the one that George Beto had used when he filmed.
It might have been. Yeah, I mean, gosh, what George Beto was the first one who, in terms of Concordia's reputation in communication, I mean, he was very innovative.
He was a filmmaker in that regard.
Sure.
He recorded all that stuff and actually used that to promote. I know they took that film on the road to show to students. I mean, that was kind of an early recruitment tool right there.
Right.
As a quick side note here, Dr. George Beto was Concordia Lutheran College's second president. He was a very well-respected man who later went on to become director of the Texas Department of Corrections. But while he was at Concordia as a professor in his early days in the 1940s, he took a 16-millimeter film camera around campus to record various college academics and activities with students to use as a visual recruitment tool that was taken on the road and shown at various churches around the area. He was perhaps Concordia's first filmmaker. So how did you get hired at Concordia Lutheran College?
I think it was a mistake on their part. I was a student worker in the biology lab, and when I went over to UT to finish, Phil Schulp had left, and Larry Meissner came in.
Yes.
And he was unfamiliar with all that stuff in the lab.
Yeah.
And was not quite ready to just change curriculum first time.
Right.
And so they hired me back to kind of managed that stuff for him.
Yeah.
And so I had access to that equipment.
Yeah.
And there was a IBM Selectric in the lab there, and that's where I typed all my papers for college. On that IBM Selectric. Thank you, Concordia. And then because Peter was still around, was doing more, we're getting more equipment, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was able to collaborate with him. We did a documentary on the rural church. We shot on video, and then we transferred it to film.
Yeah.
And that was used by the district. That was probably my first real paid gig. I think we got a budget of $300 to do that whole thing.
Wow.
And no money for our pocket, but we did pay our expenses. We went out and did interviews with people.
And you were on camera for some of that?
Yeah, I was. I was on camera for that. Did some narration and that sort of thing.
What was that process like with that gear back then?
Tricky.
Yeah.
You just couldn't be set up and ready to go. Like your iPhone now, it's just gorgeous high definition stuff. You had to work harder to get it. You had to do a lot of lighting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the lighting gear was hot and heavy and
time consuming to set up.
And audio was always a bit of a stretch. Now there's just so many better electronics. And so it was hard to get good audio.
I'm talking with filmmaker and film scholar Philip Hohle. So Concordia started with, I believe, Lutheran Electronic Media, right?
Right. That was the production company we formed as sort of I don't know what you would call it. It was a business working within the university's auspices.
Right.
Trinity University down in San Antonio had a similar company.
Yeah.
That they produced the first Jim Dobson series down at Trinity.
Oh, wow.
I got to know those guys a little bit. Some people said, well, there's some tax issues there because you're competing for jobs that tax-paying businesses do, but nobody was really threatened by what we were doing.
Right.
I don't think.
Yeah.
Maybe Trinity, those guys they actually had a video truck.
Oh, wow.
So, by the way, the garage in the Peter Center was designed for us to have a video truck.
I thought I remember hearing that at some point.
And it was never used for a video truck other than, when we loaded up our vans and we'd park them down there occasionally, before we'd go on a shoot somewhere.
Yeah.
But like Lutheran Electronic Media was the brand of our production company, doing mostly district stuff, few other clients. We did I think we got a couple of national gigs. The first youth gathering in San Antonio called Amigos de Cristo.
Yes.
We got the gig to do that, not only producing the review video, but we were producing the actual events. Themselves. So
that was really your first youth gathering project there.
Yeah, that was the first youth gathering project. And I did many other youth gatherings in that same role until the first Atlanta. Have they been to Atlanta twice? Maybe not. I don't know.
I think so.
Yeah, they moved it after Katrina.
Yes, that's right.
I had done the pre-gathering video with the staff there for the New Orleans one, and then the hurricane hit just a few days after we finished filming down there.
Oh, yeah.
And it was still edited together in a music video. There was a young hotshot producer, young guy who was really good at editing and that sort of thing. He had a good eye.
Yeah.
And so he was given most of the creative part of that. I was more of the producer at that time, but it turned out really good.
Yeah.
Shooting down in New Orleans was just a fun thing to do. And I did a lot of we had gotten like a Steadicam.
Right. Oh,
and I did the Steadicam work. And I remember this long tracking shot where I followed these youth that were representing, the gathering.
Mm-hmm.
I followed them down Canal Street into the Jackson Square there, where the cathedral is, whatever they call it.
Oh, yeah.
And we're walking around them with this cameras, and he sped that up and slowed it down, sped it up and slowed it down. I was really proud of that shot. That was it took a lot of effort to get that done. So
I love that. LEM eventually became Concordia Media Services at some point, which really was the same thing, but just kind of rebranded.
Yeah. To tie it more directly with the college. I think that was a good move on our part. And Lutheran was, I hate to say it was confining.
Yeah.
But we wanted to expand beyond to other, organizations out there.
Right.
So,
but y'all are still also serving the internal needs of the
yes, the
college
university. Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. And then, of course, much later that became Concordia Communications, and I worked for them then.
Do you remember the back to school video we made?
Yes, I do. That is famous. That is infamous
I know.
in Concordia media circles. It's such a great video. It's still fun to look back on. And
Yeah, I think there was another Reach for Your Best, I think it was called.
Yes.
It was very innovative.
Yes.
We subtly used indirect communication to make the point. We were still competing against the other Lutheran colleges.
Right.
And I hated as an admissions officer to lose kids to Concordia Seward.
Yeah.
And so we made this little shot of, and we used St. Paul to school right beside it to represent like an old dorm at Concordia Seward. And the guys came out, maybe you might have been in the shot, I don't know. They came out and they tossed a football as they were running down the steps like you were leaving the dorm. Yeah. And then the reverse angle shot, we took you out to a cow pasture.
Oh, that's right.
And he caught the ball and you're stepping in cow manure and that sort of thing. And that was just sort of a dig to these rural schools out there and saying, hey, we're in Austin.
We're in a city.
Yeah, we're in a city. And that was so much fun.
Yeah, there was some fun. Really, a lot of the creativity really took off, I think, during that time period in terms of some of those projects that were just fun to watch, fun to be a part of, and just interesting.
And there's something about creativity, and maybe this is the only bit of wisdom I can give you on this, is sometimes your client's not ready for creativity. Mm-hmm. They don't know what to do with it.
Right.
Okay.
Oh, so true.
Too innovative, too edgy, too sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And that I will confess that in some of my work, I think I got too cute.
Yeah.
And it might have been serving myself more than the client. The
client, yeah.
And one example of that, or let me put it this way, this is an example of the potential of harm. Mm-hmm. When I went up to Synod to work for them, I'm skipping ahead a little bit.
That's fine, yeah.
One of my first jobs was for the new, to help the new president, Ralph Bowman, do a video that they were going to send out to all the churches, okay? Right. And in the past, they would set the president down in a chair behind a desk or something, and they would record him looking into the camera with a teleprompter. And I says, well, let's try this a little different. Dr. Bowman, if you're willing, I'm going to come along with you and get behind you and show how you're interacting with people and talking to them. And we're going to just use clips from that to make this video. Okay. Yeah. And, what happened was that, my bosses were saying, yeah, but we don't really want to spend a lot of money on this. And I said, I'll make it work. I'll be it as cheaply as I can possibly be. And I put a lot of extra effort into that and went around to about 4 or 5 different places with Dr. Bowman, came back. And we had together a really good video for the churches, but his critics hated it. They panned it. Oh, and one of the things is that the critics published their own little magazine or newsletter or whatever. Mm-hmm. And they said that they were claiming that it cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, and that Bowman was spending money unwisely and putting himself out there as some sort of celebrity president. He was not that at all. Right. He was very humble. Yeah. Man, okay.
Exactly.
And I realized when he became unelected at the next convention that I may have contributed to that.
Interesting.
To this image that he was not faithful to the real calling of the president of the church body.
Which goes back to what you were talking about earlier about understanding how media communicates, and it's different for everybody.
Exactly.
And even getting into, to talk about in a bit, the filmmaker's prayer, what a filmmaker intends versus maybe what an audience comes away with.
Right. Absolutely. And so those little episodes in life kind of taught me that something else was going on in communication, and which led me to those books and teaching in that area.
Filmmaker and writer of Cinema and Religion, The Filmmaker's Prayer, Philip Hohle joins me today on Creative Christians. You had a hand in designing that video production studio, right?
Yeah.
The one that was in the Peter Center.
Yeah, I should have put on there an architect as one of my jobs.
Yeah, there you go. Well, for a lot of us Concordia media students, we cut our teeth in that facility. I personally spent many a night there editing and spent the night there. In fact, at one point, I even had a key to the place as a student because I was in and out of there so much. And it was truly kind of like a second home to me and many others. Sadly, it's no longer there. Campus moved in 2009. The downtown campus was razed. And Concordia moved to another location in Northwest Austin. But some great, great memories there. What did you appreciate most about being able to develop that facility and then working in it?
Yeah. Again, the leadership at that time, Milt Reamer, for example, it was Hal Rutz were kind of behind getting going and saying, how are we going to use this facility? They made a mistake in giving me some leeway. And I kept saying, well, I'm going to keep designing it the way I think it needs to be designed. And they can tell me to stop.
Right.
And I was surprised how far they let me go.
Yeah.
One of Tim, this was the finest production facility in even state schools. Mm-hmm. Okay. Definitely. I saw what the University of Texas had. Right. And I knew what it did well and what it didn't do well. I mean, they had a whole floor full of TV studios there for our students. Right. And I could see what they were doing and what needed to be done when we built ours, which was going to be one big studio plus the performance hall next door. Right. And one of the problems even at UT was noise in the hall. Yeah. And I went to a sound engineer and I says, how can we minimize the noise so that we don't get interrupted? And they proposed a floating concrete floor. Oh, very cool. And double walls for the studio building. And it was very isolated. It wasn't 100%. I don't know how many studios are 100% that way, but if it hailed on the roof, you would hear it in there. But if you dropped a hammer out in the hallway, you wouldn't. No, it was a very dead sound, and it was great to record in. Yeah, and so I was proud of that. The studio with the computer floor. Mm-hmm. So we could wire and rewire and move stuff around. Lift the floor panels up and be able to reconfigure things. Yeah. So things like that. The air conditioning really never worked properly in that building. Yeah. If there's one thing that really frustrated me is that it tended to make too much noise. Yeah. And we had designed the ductwork so that it would not have that kind of work, but the air conditioner had to work so hard for some reason. Yeah. I don't know if it was the high ceilings that was a bit of a problem. But otherwise, that was a very fantastic building. Yeah, it was a great facility. Yeah. And I love that you could use the performance hall. You could take the camera cables and they were run over to the performance hall so you could actually set the roll the giant cameras on their huge metal tripods over to the performance hall, and you could use that to shoot things too. So shot a Bill Moyer special. That's right, for PBS. Yeah. Bill Moyer. It was a groundbreaking one because it was about men, which was very trendy at the time. I forget the name of the poet from Minnesota that came down and was really popular at the time. And they were talking about men going out in the woods and banging drums and beating their chests. And, oh, man, the women were so interested in this. And this was only a men's only audience. Yeah. And the makeup artist came in to do Moyers and this poet, I forget his name. Yeah. And she says, oh, I'm just so curious. I got to find out what they're talking about. So I snuck her into the booth where the lighting booth right up at the top so she could listen in. So, that's so cool. But it's fun. You could probably still find that Bill Moyer special on the internet someplace, I bet. Definitely. Because it was groundbreaking. It got a lot of attention. That was a big deal at the time. Which brings me to this one, too. I think in 1991... you produced and directed Reinhold Marxhausen's presentation of new forms for worship. Yeah, we did a couple of videos with him. That's right. There was more than one. How did that come about, and what was kind of groundbreaking a little bit about that? Yeah, there was a guy up in Dallas named Ken Ring. Mm-hmm. I think he's passed away now. He had Lutheran visuals, and he kind of took the idea that we had in Austin about having an exchange video library for people. Yeah. We had started that at Concordia, and he took that more nationally and began producing materials because there was just not enough videos out there.
Right.
And so he convinced Markshausen to come down to Austin and do this series that he was going to sell.
And Markshausen was an artist?
I was at Concordia Seward.
Yeah. Okay.
And very, very well known. Anybody who went to Concordia Seward in those days had stories of him. So it was a lot of fun. He came in with his pictures, and we got an audience together in the studio there and taped, and it was good. It was fun.
Interesting.
He gave me a moon rock. You know what those are? The little disc. It's like a rock. Yeah. It's made out of stainless steel. But if you tap it on something, it makes this noise, because he was good at art that also had an aural, an audio kind of dimension to it. Yeah. That's where you got on Letterman for.
Oh, yes.
And so he gave me one of those. So I still have one to this day. And I'll, keep it on my desk, and people will come by and I'll show them.
I don't think I've seen this
Stardust. I said, this is Stardust. It came from a star. His name was Ronald People Markshausen.
Yeah. He was an interesting guy. I remember that. I think I met him once. Eventually, you ended up moving to St. Louis in 89. Yeah. To start working for the LCMS, which is Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, the International Center there.
Right. Board of Communication Services.
You were kind of moving up. It was kind of promotion in some ways.
I went from a really nice studio to a makeshift studio in a building that just wasn't designed for it.
Well,
no, at all. It was frustrating. And I just needed to get out and do it mobile instead of there. Yeah. And so we did. We traveled a lot. I was sent to a lot of different places, including Germany, the first time in Germany. And that was good. It worked for about a year and a half for me, but there was just some tension there. Yeah. I had a different vision for where we were going. And one of the things was the director at the time wanted this satellite network. Mm-hmm. And some of you may remember, I don't know if it's still there, there's a big old satellite dish sitting out on the south side of the International Center, right off Interstate 44 in St. Louis. Right. And, I kept saying, and unfortunately I said it publicly, probably should have kept my mouth shut, but I said, what programming are we going to put on there? Right. And I said, and of course it would need to be live, because that's why you would have a satellite network. Otherwise we'll mail them a videotape.
Right. Exactly.
And that question embarrassed the leadership. Mm. And so it was just, the writing was on the wall. It was time to do something else. And it just turned out that God put me in a place where I could start my own business. Yeah. And serve some of the same clients, much to their chagrin. Right. To the point where, even they were giving away services for a while. Wow. Just to get their clients back. And then they shut it down. Yeah. A new director came in and he said, why should we have our own unit here when we got Parabolic Media right down the street? Exactly. And that's when you formed Parabolic Productions. And I formed it a year and a half after we was St. Louis. So I had done that in 91, I guess it was, when we started. Yeah. And, by the early 2000s, somewhere in there, we were designated the official production arm of Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. Wow. They shut that studio down. And CPH too, right? Concordia Publishing House. Well, Peter was still there at Concordia Publishing House. He went to St. Louis before I did, and we did collaborative work and stuff. We were one of his subcontractors, not his only one. Right. And then he went independent, and we shared offices for a while. Yeah. Okay. Until I took the career change to come back here.
Today, my guest is my mentor and friend, Philip Hohle from Austin, Texas. Let's talk about the youth gatherings. As I looked at the infamous bathtub photo that became a tradition of the youth gatherings. Okay, now wait a minute. You better explain that to your listeners, okay? Yes, that sounds far more salacious. Yes, we all did get in the bathtub together. But now you explain. Fully clothed. Yes, of course. There was a tradition at the end of every youth gathering where all us media folk gathered and worked with Parabolic in various media capacities. But at the end, when the project wrapped and the gathering was over, we all gathered, the whole crew, everybody gathered together in the kind of the main suite for the video crew. in the bathroom. Everybody's squeezed into the bathtub for a group photo, fully clothed. And here I can see in one of the photos up on the screen here now, bearing the Parabolic Productions banner. So it was a fun tradition.
Because the youth gathering is such an enormous,
massive events.
It takes 3 years to plan.
Wow.
And when my last one, we had 36,000 people.
Yes.
And we had a lot of programming. We had the stuff in the stage area, wherever that was going to be. In Atlanta, it was actually a convention center. We brought in the fly cam in there.
Oh, yeah.
Because it was such an enormous expanse of people sitting on a flat floor.
Mm-hmm.
We had to find ways to get them involved.
Yeah.
And by bringing a camera that we could zip along the line around the place, that helped a lot.
Oh, yeah.
And then we had, how many screens? We must have had, we had 12 screens, I think, scattered around. And they were alternate screens. Some of those were alternate, where we have an alternate feed than what the other screens had. So we may have something in a close-up and something in somebody listening to something going on the stage at the same time. And so I had somebody in the video truck switching those screens independently of me being in the director's chair in the truck, focusing on telling the story from the primary angle.
Right.
And I thought that was very innovative.
Oh, definitely.
And it was the idea was to bring those people in sitting on this flat floor so far away.
Yeah.
To make them feel more involved and, to gain and keep their attention, which is not usually a problem at a youth gathering. But.
Generally not, no. And for those that aren't aware, listeners, these youth gatherings are these huge national youth gatherings put on for the Lutheran youth in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod every 3 years, and held in a different city each time, whichever one can actually hold the number of students. Because as you just mentioned, it got up to 36,000. I think it's gone down since then, but you needed cities that could actually host that big a group of kids for, what was it, a week?
Yeah.
A week.
Well, almost a week. 5 days, basically.
5 days.
Yeah.
And so, of course...
Or at least it was 5 days. I don't know. Maybe it's shorter now. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's still close to that.
They just finished the one in Houston.
They did, yeah. But big, massive events are requiring not only all sorts of,
Superdome, Georgia Dome.
Right, yeah.
Alamo Dome,
San Antonio.
Yeah. Nichols Arena in Denver when it was still around.
Oh, yeah.
We tried one at a convention center in Washington, D.C. Again, it was a lot of flat floor.
Right.
There were some bleachers in there. And then the planner said, we got so many people, let's expand the gathering. And we had already, planned it.
Right.
And so now we had to say, oh my gosh, we're going to put, another 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 people behind the last seat now.
Right.
And what additional problems that would cause, audio and video. But we overcame that, and we were able to make it happen.
Make it work,
We were able to darken the ceiling of the Georgia Dome.
Yeah.
Which was done only twice, and I think in that entire history of that facility, to make it where it could be dark.
Dark enough, yeah. Just the coordination putting this. I don't know how you did that. I was grateful that Phil brought me in to be a part of these youth gathering projects. I was usually a shooter in those years, and so I was cameraman for a lot of the field crews that would go out when the kids would do servant events, and we'd do stories on those. And then there were other people that were crewing the cameras in the domes and things like that. You needed audio, you needed field producers, you needed shooters, editors back in the hotel suite to pull all this off.
We pretty well invented that whole thing that's still going on today. I mean, you need that stuff.
Absolutely.
You need to bring back the footage from the field and show it to people
that evening. Yeah, exactly, and have it shot, processed, edited into these slick pieces. Right. Which then was even a little more challenging because we were tape-based, as opposed to today being so much more digital. Yeah. And you can turn stuff around a little bit quicker that way. But then, you had to ingest the tape.
Which is going back to the bathtub. That's why we got the suites.
Yeah.
A lot of those were given as a compliment to the gathering because we're booking basically the whole hotel. And it's not generally where you want your high school kids putting, in a nice suite. So we would take over the suite, we'd move tables around, we'd run cable. The maids would come in and just kind of go, what do you want us to do? And we're fine. Just give us some extra towels.
Right. Exactly.
And I remember in the Omni in Atlanta, we overlooked, and right across the atrium there was CNN. And we had our own CNN going there. We hung our parabolic banner so everybody could see it from the atrium there. And we set up dual editing systems and, kept those things running constantly. The editors would edit at night and have something fresh in the morning you crew guys would just bust your buns all day and come back with tape. And so it was very tightly organized, and we had good people that were very reliable and told good stories. And I was just proud to be, a part of the team.
Oh yeah. Those were so much fun. Those are still for me some of the fondest memories of just working together with a big crew, big team of people, each that had unique gifts and talents and abilities. Sure. And it was so fun to do that and to be part of something bigger than just a small independent project. So I just loved being a part of those. Were so much fun days.
I loved them too.
What would you say were some of the greatest challenges that came out of, like communicating with the client, getting the vision across, timing, maybe the stress of delivering these videos in time for the next day or the evening? What were some of the biggest challenges that you had to overcome on a project of that scale?
Well, that was, the deadline was pretty hard deadline. If that tape wasn't ready, there was a hole in the program for the gathering.
Right.
Either the Bible study or the mass event itself.
It had to be stressful.
Yeah. And fortunately, the editors bore most of that stress. Right. We were standing over their shoulders, and sometimes I did editing. Most of the time, my role was in the mass event in the truck.
That you're directing
I was directing,
live shots.
And I felt like, because of the way I was trained in University of Texas, was for live production.
Right.
And so I thought, well, if anybody on the team going to do it, I should be the one that does it. And that's stressful.
How many cameras did you have?
Oh my gosh. I don't know. At least 8. Yeah. Which is probably small by today's standards. Sure. Mm-hmm. And, we had cranes and that sort of thing, and handheld and fixed cameras and graphics and tape that we rolled in and that sort of thing. And so we had a very detailed script, a timeline, and I had an assistant director behind me telling me what's coming next to remind me. Yeah. And then I would, call the camera out and say, take. Yeah. And the technical director hit the button. And I say, camera 2, take. I'm a 4, take. Yeah. And I'm looking at the wall and going on. Let me tell you, it takes so much adrenaline. And, those mass events can go 3 hours.
Yes.
I mean, the time that 3 hours is done, exhausted. The adrenaline falls out, but they're so spiritual to be a part of those things.
That's what I was most amazed at, is being able to witness, 20, 30,000 kids all praising God in this one place. And I remember getting chills standing in the dome sometimes at night, seeing and hearing kids just fully uplifting Christ in such an amazing way. That is a part of the experience that has never left me.
In the second San Antonio gathering, which was River of Light, I think it was, we hired a truck out of Dallas, a guy I knew, and his truck was affordable, right? Yeah. So it wasn't as fancy as some of the other trucks that cost a lot more. Right. And one of our tape man was in the back making sure things are recording, and because it went long, you had to have 2 recorders to overlap and that sort of thing. Yeah. And in San Antonio, we had this girl come in. I don't remember her name. An aspiring Christian artist that came in with a set along she could really belt it out. And her closing song was, I Know That My Redeemer Lives. It's not the hymn version of it, but it's really powerful. Right. And it had a nice beat to it. And somebody had this idea of giving kids pen lights. It was a part of the swag in the bag,
right, exactly,
that they got. And suddenly some of the kids, and this is divine, nobody planned this, they started making the sign of the cross to the beat.
Oh,
up
wow.
and across, down and across. And before you know it, the entire Alamo Dome
Yeah.
is doing this. And you could see on the face of the performer that she was just like being
The spirit
was, and
emotionally.
afterwards she was just like a wreck afterwards,
I imagine.
in a good way.
Right.
And it was just so beautiful to see this. It was so stunning visually.
Yeah. What a
And it was all,
powerful moment.
and I was back at the tape machine at that point, and watching this. I don't remember, forget the story right. Anyway, right after it ends, our tape guy got on his stool and sat down. And when he sat down, it was one of those stools that kind of have hydraulics.
Right.
It came down and it knocked the plug out of the wall, and the tape deck went dead.
Oh,
I guess what it was is, I know what it was. After it, he says, I got to talk to you. And he says, I haven't checked yet, but I think we didn't record that. Because I looked down and the tape deck was dead.
Yeah.
And so we didn't know why it was dead. And then we looked down and there it was unplugged.
Oh,
And he felt really bad. And so we plugged it back in, rewound the tape a little bit, push play, and there it was. And when it went out, it was right when it was over.
Oh, perfect.
And so it was saved. Somewhere there are DVDs that we made that were summaries of many of the youth gatherings. And I think that scene is in there somewhere. So if you've come across a DVD that says Youth Gatherings, Lutheran Church, Missouri Synod, they're out there someplace, because we made 1,000 of them.
Oh, and those were great.
And I may have one somewhere in my stacks
somewhere.
closet,
I'd love to see that.
Yeah,
that moment.
that was a special moment.
I remember just being up, moments of like where I got to run camera, mobile camera on stage for when Audio Adrenaline, the Christian rock band, was performing, and Mark Stewart was the lead singer, and being able to just be on stage, huge in the arena. They were roaming all over the place for this particular song in the evening, and I remember following him all over. And of course, him looking into the camera and just being able to be free to be mobile.
Yeah,
and it was just such a fun experience to be up there. And I probably was too much into being there with him, and maybe I wasn't concentrating enough on my shot. I don't know, but I remember being live on the big screens a couple of times. That was just a fun memory that still sticks with me. And the fact that Mark Stewart doesn't have a voice anymore to sing with Audio Adrenaline is kind of the unfortunate of that story. But it was so fun doing it.
We got to meet some interesting people.
Yeah.
Homer Drew came to speak. He was the basketball coach at Valparaiso when they won.
Oh, yeah.
They beat Mississippi State with this half-court thing. And now I'm in a Bible study with him.
No kidding.
Yeah, it's a virtual Bible study. And so, and I don't think people realize that one of our speakers ended up being a Fox News anchor for the national, Gretchen Carlson. She spoke at a youth gathering.
I did not realize that.
Yeah, she had been Miss
wonderful.
America, and she was Lutheran.
Yes.
Yeah, so people like that we got to meet. And
there were some good names that passed through the gatherings, definitely.
Yeah, great speakers.
Great speakers, powerful stories, and powerful ministry that happened at those things. And that does it for part one of my interview with Phil. My guest today has been filmmaker Philip Hohle, most certainly one of the talented creative Christians who helped me get started as a creative Christian myself. This was part one of a two-part interview. In this episode, we focused on the filmmaker. Next time, in part two, we'll focus on the film scholar. Have you ever wanted to better understand the meaning behind the films you watch? Perhaps kind of up your film interpretation game a little bit? Then you'll definitely want to join me next time as Phil discusses some of his books, including Lenses, 10 Ways to Interpret the Films You Love, and Cinema and Religion, The Filmmaker's Prayer. I'll save my reflections for at the end of part two of my interview with Phil. You can pick up Phil's books on Amazon.com and connect with Phil through his Parabolic Media website at parabolicmedia.com. That's Parabolic media.com. That's it for this episode of Creative Christians. Thank you so much for listening. Go to Apple Podcasts or whatever your favorite podcast distributor is, and be sure to subscribe to catch each and every new episode. Really appreciate it if after listening you'd take a moment to rate the show. Helps me to gauge feedback and in rankings for the show as well. If you're really feeling generous, I'd love it if you left a brief written review as well. Let me and others know what you like about Creative Christians. You can also email me directly with your feedback, comments, or questions at tim@timristow.com. I'd love to hear from you. I'm Tim Ristow. Until next time, stay creative and stay in God's Word. Blessings. Creative Christians is produced by yours truly, Tim Ristow. Special thanks to my guest today, Philip Hohle, and to his wife, Gwen. And as always, a shout out to my lovely and supportive wife, Tracy Ristow. Creative Christians is an audio production of Tim Ristow Productions. Visit timristow.com to learn more. That's TimRistow.com.